Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. This is Dan Turchin, CEO of People Rain and host of AI and the Future of Work, here with a special guest. We first spoke with Charlene Li, renowned analyst and accomplished author, in December. And well, it turns out a few things changed since then. And we thought that nobody on the planet perhaps is better than Charlene to talk about the new world of leadership and what it means to embrace your disruption mindset. And so without further ado, Charlene, so nice to have you back.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back. I appreciate it.
What's changed in your world the last 90 days?
Well, a small little thing called the pandemic. Again, stopped flying. I came home, I think, on March 5th and then didn't leave my house like many other people. And more than anything else, I have found, again, my day-to-day work has gotten a lot busier because the topic of disruption is so much on people's minds. And you could never have imagined something so big and so drastic. And so a couple of things that I have changed. I'm not traveling. I'm not giving speeches anymore. Everything got canceled or postponed. But I've also been ramping up a lot of the work that I do around this. So I've started doing more content creation because I have the time. I'm broadcasting live now, simulcasting on LinkedIn and every other platform I can find on a regular basis. And just expanding and thinking more about what does it mean to truly live and thrive with disruption. And especially on this whole idea, like, what do we do now? And the one biggest lesson that I've taken away from this is that, just because there's a disruption going on in lives, life doesn't stop. We need to keep going. And what that looks like is to find the opportunities. So I'm really working on helping leaders thrive in this disruptive world by looking for the opportunities for growth and change, even amidst all this chaos.
You literally wrote the book on disruption, and here we've all been disrupted, and beyond just our travel schedules and our speaking schedules. Which of these changes are permanent and which will be gone in the blink of an eye?
I think the biggest one that I think is permanent is this whole idea that you can work remotely from people. You don't have to be standing shoulder to shoulder next to people in order to get great work done. I've seen some great examples of people who had business continuity strategies literally put in place a month before this happened, just in case something happened, and they are thriving. And so I think that has fundamentally changed. That assumption, that status quo that we have to be flying halfway around the world for a 2-hour meeting is out the window. Because we've developed so many great experiences that dictate that this is going to change. I think what's going to be fleeting is this sense that we are in a dangerous place. I think we've gone from like being totally chaotic, the door slammed on the way we work, into a place now where we're in our little safe cocoons. And it feels really unsafe outside of that because the rules aren't written, the processes aren't there. There's a huge amount of uncertainty. And I think that feeling of uncertainty, the lack of trust of knowing what's out there is going to be fleeting. I do believe that we will develop better trust markers. We just don't have them today. So depending on where you are in the country and the world, we're at different stages of that. And I think there's going to be a lot of confusion as we try to figure out, so which stage are you at? What comfort level are you at? Which is going to require a lot of communications in the short term.
Managers are being pushed out of their comfort zone every day. In the new world, what is the set of skills that managers need to lead not just remote teams, but perhaps teams where there are different sources of anxiety, team members dealing with childcare and elder care and all sorts of new potentially distractions or impediments to productivity? What do you coach managers to do in this environment?
I think the biggest change is that we have to have a lot more empathy. Empathy was always a key part of being a leader, and it's even more so now. And the fact that we've had a glimpse into people's real lives. We were able to shove into a closet our real lives when we stepped through the thresholds of our offices. And now when that boundary is much thinner, it's almost non-existent, we have to be a lot more attuned to the fact that we can't just completely shut off that side of our world. It is much more intermeshed than we ever thought. And so being able to see people's houses, see their lives, see their full selves, see people for the full people that they are, I think is going to make us all much better leaders and managers because we have to have an appreciation for that. And for all the times when you're able to give some flexibility and some understanding for the different circumstances, people will reward that, we pay that back in so many ways in terms of loyalty, dedication, engagement. It's endless because it is by far the most important way to retain and reward people.
We talk very casually about how, air quotes, work has fundamentally changed. I ask you a more fundamental question. What is work? And has the definition of work changed in the last 90 days?
Yeah, I think we've always thought of work as a physical place, as an office, a place you go to. And what we have learned because of this crisis is that work is defined by the relationships that we have and how we use those relationships to get work done. And so work and the workplace, we've always thought about the future of work. And maybe we should take a step back and think of it as the future of our work relationships. So the question that you just had before, which is, how are we going to be changing the way we think about the whole aspect of all of our lives? The fact that we're working parents or parents, we have elderly parents to take care of, or whatever it is that's going on in our lives, we will take that into account and be much more holistic about this. So I think about work as fundamentally changing in that we think of this divide between work and personal. We start understanding how they interact with each other. And so if we define the future of work as how we will work together and the types of relationships needed to make that happen, how much openness, how much transparency and accountability we're going to build into our workplace and our work with each other.
Brilliant. I hope everyone is listening and takes that into account as they rethink how to be relevant and what we've been calling on this show, how to build back better. Now, Charlene, I think our listeners are going to want to learn a little bit more than what we're going to share in this short podcast. I hear there's maybe a preface to your book that you're republishing.
Right. Again, I published the book before there was ever a pandemic. Never even thought about it. So I thought it would be appropriate to write a new preface to it. So I wrote it back towards the end of April. And it talks about how to think about this space where disruption isn't an option. It has happened to all of us. So how do we think about this role? Give 5 pieces of advice. And then just thinking about how do you thrive with this rather than be bitten down by it. I do believe that there are opportunities being created by disruption. And it's your choice to say, am I going to sit back and wait for the disruption and the chaos to settle down? And then I'll think about what the opportunities and growth are. Or will I jump into this feet first and look for those opportunities? And my sense is if you're able to find those opportunities to look to that future, you're going to be so much better off than if you're sitting back and waiting and hoping that you don't get hit by the disruption right square in the face. So you can find, I'm making it available and also the ebook version of the book. So you can find it at bit.ly, so bit.ly free-disruption-book. So free disruption book. And I'll send you the link too as well so you can have it.
Well, there you have it. We're going to play the rest of our conversation from December. Before we finish this quick conversation, if you listen to the podcast regularly and you enjoy it, I'd encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter. Go to peoplereign.io/podcast. That's people, reign, like the reign of a king, REIGN.io/podcast for additional insights from great guests like Charlene and some bonus material. With that said, Charlene, so nice talking to you. Thanks for coming back.
Hey, thank you again.
The following audio discussion is episode 13 of Astound's podcast series, AI and the Future of Work. Host Dan Turchin, co-founder and chief product officer of Astound, interviews distinguished analyst and author Charlene Li about how to disrupt, based on research conducted when writing her best-selling book, The Disruption Mindset.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you are listening from. This is Dan Turchin, co-founder of Astound and your host of AI and the Future of Work. So excited about today's conversation. We have the wonderful Charlene Li, who I've been a longtime fan of, followed her since her early days as an analyst at Forrester, and now a very accomplished author. Really looking forward to giving you a chance to get to know Charlene today. Charlene, welcome to the podcast. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Charlene Li. I've been a longtime analyst, as you were saying, Dan, for 20 years. I've been researching all the breaking new technologies and their impact on business, and recently have written my 6th book called The Disruption Mindset. And it's all about how do you actually create disruption and exponential growth. And we'll talk more about that.
Fantastic. So let's jump right in. I loved your book. I know it's become very popular for good reason. So one of the theses in the book is that disruption doesn't create growth. It's more that growth creates disruption, which I find kind of intriguing. I'd love to hear you explain that in your own words.
Yes. And as somebody who's been following disruption, it took me a while to figure that out because I think we oftentimes look for what's the disruptive technology or disruptive innovation that's going to drive growth. But I found something really interesting when I asked people, like, what would it take for you to grow twice as much as you're growing today? And they usually say, I know exactly what I would do. I would do things completely different. I would do X, Y, Z, and ABC. I'm like, that's great. So why don't you do it? He goes, oh, it'd be too hard. It'd be way too disruptive. And we can't do that. We'd never get permission to do that. And so it struck me that in many cases, it's not this bright, shiny object or something that's out of the bailiwick of whatever the organization is doing already that's keeping people back. It's the fact that, man, if we were to actually grow, that would be awfully hard. It'd be scary. So I think in many ways, the thing that was holding people back was the possibility that they could actually do this, that focus and that determination. And so I wanted to study why the heck aren't people doing this? And what are the people who are doing this, who are growing exponentially? What is it that they're doing right that everybody else needs to learn from?
Makes sense. Comes through loud and clear in the book. So I love all the colorful examples you give from Adobe and kind of how their shift to the cloud and the uncarrier T-Mobile and some of the interesting ways you used to illustrate your points. I got to ask, so what was the most interesting interview that you did as part of your research? And kind of what was something that maybe surprised you in the course of that interview?
Well, one of the organizations, not even a company, was Southern New Hampshire University, which says this, when it started, was a 3,000 person campus. And guess where? Southern New Hampshire. And I sat down with Paul LeBlanc. He happened to be in the Bay Area. And we just had the most amazing conversation. I think it went on for 2.5 hours over lunch. It just went on and on and on. And the more I dug, I'm like, please tell me more. Do you have time? He's like, sure, I have time. And it was this fascinating story of how this tiny little university in the middle of nowhere practically, became the largest provider of online education in the world. And they're going to clear $1 billion this year. So I'm like, this is a huge growth story. So I think we oftentimes think you have to be a startup, you have to be in tech to drive exponential growth. And here is a nonprofit educational institution showing everybody else how it should be done.
I was recently on the campus of, they call it SNU, Southern New Hampshire University. And like you, so inspired. What they've done with remote learning and, kind of rethinking the traditional education model, I totally share the thesis. It needs to happen. And who would have thought that Southern New Hampshire, of all places, would be kind of a hotbed of innovation like that?
Yeah, and they basically said, well, why not us? We see this need. We see this future student whose needs are not being met. And there are millions of them out there like this. So why don't we do this? And in the process, also, we think what it means to have a college degree. Does it mean you have to sit in a classroom for 4 years? Or do you need to demonstrate a certain level of competency? So they're blowing everything up left and right and doing it in such a student-focused way. It's really admirable.
I'm a firm believer that the way we currently deliver education is about the most efficient way possible. A small ratio of, an instructor standing up in front of the class and lecturing just doesn't work for the rest of the world, particularly emerging markets. So yeah, whether it's, what Southern New Hampshire's doing or other models, obviously Coursera or Khan Academy, things like that, I feel like so needed to disrupt the traditional mechanisms of delivering education.
So yeah, one of the things that I really tried to do with the book was to find examples that were not the usual suspects. And I didn't want tech companies. Again, I think I do pull in examples from Google, Amazon, Netflix, Apple, again, the usual suspects, but like point examples of things specifically that they do really well. But I think most people look at those examples when people say, just be like Google. You're like, right, I can't be just like Google. Like, that's not relevant. It's not helpful. So I really try to find companies that you feel like, well, that's just like us. They're just like us. They have like the same cranky executives and dysfunctions as we do. And it's just as messy. And that gives us hope and confidence that we could do this too.
Sometimes we learn as much from what doesn't work than what does work. And one of the colorful examples you give in the book is from your own personal experience with Mercury News and then McClatchy versus, a small publishing house in Scandinavia. Maybe if you could retell that story.
So when I came out of business school, I decided to go into newspapers, which is not something that people do coming out of Harvard Business School very often. But it was 1993 and the internet was just being born. And I decided to plant myself at the Mercury News, which is in the middle of Silicon Valley. And because I wanted to be in the middle of this disruption happening. And I figured newspapers would be one of the first organizations to move to the web. And it was. And so really I had a front row seat seeing, what are the challenges? And Knight Ridder was really on top of it, did all the right things. And in the end, couldn't turn around the company and make it work. And so got bought out by McClatchy. And halfway around the world was this little group of newspapers, actually pretty big newspapers in Sweden called Schibsted. And they also started doing things, but they went full board in. No holding back, no protection of the print business, which is what Knight Ridder was doing, was really playing first and foremost to the traditional business of publishers. Whereas Schibsted really said, love our print business. We want to support it with all the profits, but we've got to take advantage of this online business now. So they were able to endure the pain and become, again, they're the largest provider of classifieds, paid classifieds, highly profitable in Europe. And it was because they made these early moves and decided to cannibalize and disrupt themselves before anybody else could, and to be 100% focused on who that future customer is, to drive all the alignment that was needed in the organization to make that happen.
We're seeing that model for disruption play out in essentially every industry, whether it's media like you discussed, but obviously transportation or lodging or healthcare, even defense. What would you say is the next major industry that is ripe for disruption?
I would say that any industry that has the potential for digital, for new customers to come in, to buy in a different way, is ripe for disruption. That's basically every single industry. So I'll give you an example. I was speaking to an executive of a sand company, S-A-N-D. You're not mistaking this, sand, like the stuff that you found on the beach, right? It's a commodity. And he was like, oh my goodness, I need to talk to you. My industry is being disrupted like there's no tomorrow. I'm like, you're in sand. What are you talking about? And he goes, material science that's needed to keep up with the demands on glass, because sand is a component of glass. And the touch glass, the Gorilla Glass, and all these other, and so many other places. He goes, we used to rely on a bunch of distributors to tell us what was going on in the marketplace. And now we're having to establish relationships with tens of thousands of end customers who don't even sell to understand their needs so we can stay on top of the material science. So we're facing a huge amount of this disruption. I'm like, and that's when I realized it's something very interesting. About 5 years ago, people were still coming up to me going, this disruption thing, I know, I got to do it. But can I just kind of ignore it for a couple more years? I got a lot of stuff, other things I want to take care of. Can I just put it off? And I would hear that all the time, like 5 years ago. I never hear it anymore. I do not hear it from anybody that says, yeah, disruption is not going to impact me. Every single executive I talk to realizes that they are in a disruptive time. And so they need to act now. They need to figure out what their disruption strategy is going to be. It's a fundamentally different mindset that's happening out there right now.
So I got to ask, so take me through the mind of an analyst. So presumably you're not a sand expert. So how do you, but you said, there's an opportunity for disruption wherever there are kind of new buying patterns. Where do you go in terms of giving advice to the sand executive?
So this is a great question, because that somebody asked me this, like, what are the 3 questions I have to ask to be on top of this? I'm like, that's great. How come you didn't ask me this question before I finished publishing the book? So here, this is not in the book, but the 3 questions I would recommend that you ask are, first of all, do you know who your future customer is? Okay. If you don't know who your future customer is, then you stop everything else you're doing and figure that out. The second thing is, does your entire organization know who that future customer is? Like, how do you have the structure internally to make sure everyone will align around that? So you're focusing on the right thing instead of the wrong thing. And the third thing is, do you know what is going to be needed to take? What are the things that you are going to have to change in order to meet the needs of the future customers? What are you not doing today? What has to change for you to go after that? You name those 3 things, you can answer those 3 questions, then you're in a pretty good place to be able to figure everything else out. But you have to be able to answer those 3 questions.
Sounds so easy when you distill it down into 3 questions like that.
I know, but the thing is that it is incredibly difficult. I'm not making any bones about this. I think that disruption is incredibly hard. And we're fooling ourselves if we think there's a magic bullet or an easy button that you can press. I'm not sitting here saying this is easy. In fact, I'm saying just the opposite. It's going to be incredibly difficult. It's going to be highly disruptive. It's going to feel awful. And it's the absolutely right thing you have to do. And the sooner you realize that this is what it looks like and feels like to be in a disruptive place, it is not comfortable, but you're driven to do this because you so believe that you're doing the right thing for your customers. You're willing to take on the sacrifice, the pain, the discomfort to be able to build this thing for your customers.
Well said. So you're speaking to a bunch of entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs. What's your sense of what's it going to take, call it, in the next decade to be a successful entrepreneur, given we have a bunch of unfair advantages that we didn't have? It's certainly cheaper to launch global businesses, but then potentially, maybe some headwinds as well. What's your advice for entrepreneurs?
I think the biggest advantage that entrepreneurs have and startups have is that you typically don't start with existing customers. And that is a huge blessing because you're not stuck in the current. You have no choice but to look to the future. But you lose that advantage the minute you get your first customer because you're celebrating because, my goodness, I have my first customer. Now it's like, okay, let's go find more of this first customer. And you may or may not want to have more of that first customer because then you fall into the same trap like every other incumbent. You have an installed base. And so it's constantly, again, leaning into where you started, always be looking into the future and never, ever lose sight of that. Because I find so many entrepreneurs, they lose that edge. Like, why do they lose that edge? They were the leader in the market. How did they fall behind? Was this something that they did in the organization? No, it's a matter of taking the focus off. And they were doing all the good business things, like focus on your customers, serve your customers really well, make them happy, measure the NPS. But if you're measuring the NPS of your current customers and not trying to figure out the NPS, even whatever that metric is of your future customer, you're going to lose. Because what happens is then you fall into the same trap as every other incumbent. And every incumbent is going to have more money, better people, more brand, established customers than you as an entrepreneur and startup. And you will be doomed. Because if you're fighting against them with all of their resources against the one advantage that you have, which is thinking about the future customer, you're going to lose.
It's one of the paradoxes of entrepreneurship that customers are your lifeblood, but they can lead you to become educated about a market that may not be the right one to target.
Right. My favorite example of this is Mark Zuckerberg. When he started Facebook, he quickly penetrated colleges. Okay, every college student in the U.S. is a member of Facebook now. Where do I continue to grow? High school students, we'll go get high school students. They all join. Now what do? The most obvious thing possible, of course, we're going to get their parents to come on board. Now, what college student and high school student ever wanted their parents to join their social network? None. And that is exactly what Mark Zuckerberg did against the interests of his customers. but he kept them happy enough. He understood their needs and kept them engaged enough that they wouldn't leave even when their parents came. And that has been the magic sauce of Facebook, is they continually seek out these new markets, these new users, and annoy the people who are already there just enough to tolerate these changes, but not enough so that they would want to leave. It's a really interesting exercise and focusing constantly on that future growth and market.
Good example. It's one of the things that you kind of unpack that maybe seems controversial at first is that innovation is not equal to disruption. They're actually quite different. You could certainly argue innovation is inherently disruptive, but what's your take on that?
No, I actually think in many ways, innovation in the way that we use it today is designed to not be disruptive. We want innovation to be easy, to be obvious, to be orderly, to have an ROI, and to do just the opposite, to not cause disruption. We just want innovation to magically happen without any distress. It should be this nice, calm, research, everything in white, everything's orderly. And the reality is that if it's truly innovative and it's going to cause growth to happen, it is by definition disruptive. And so what happens is in a lot of innovation places, they're intentionally stuck out of the core of the business. You have an innovation center set as far away possibly it could be from headquarters so that those innovators can go over there and cause problems and not upset the mothership. And I think that in so many ways is a shame, because what you actually want to do is to bring all of that innovation, all of that tension, all of that disruption right into the middle of everything, because that's the only way you can actually change things. So I think in many ways, innovation is great. I think it's in many ways a false promise that if you follow this innovation, make it straightforward, make it this calm process, we're going to get great growth out of it. I've never seen it happen. It's always disruptive when it comes back in.
Good points. So in this show, we talk about AI and the future of work. And I'd like to believe that now more than ever, every employee and essentially every organization is capable of disruption. I think we'd probably agree org charts are kind of flattening. We have better collaboration tools to be able to kind of cross-pollinate ideas across geographies. If you're giving advice to someone who's maybe a rank and file employee, but with a bold idea, what coaching would you have for them about how to kind of communicate their disruptive ideas effectively from within the belly of an organization?
Well, I always go back to the two things they can do. If they can understand what are the top priorities of the organization, and they're usually 3, maximum of 5, because they only have 5 fingers. And people need to be able to count off each of the initiatives on those 5 fingers. So tie it to one of those initiatives. Unless you can say, this is going to help us accomplish one of our key strategic goals, whatever number you have, they won't care about it. It just will not matter. It cannot be about a new technology. It really has to be, how does this help us identify and move us forward on those strategic goals? So you have to put it in context. And then the second thing I would say is, this is more so from the executive and the organizational perspective, and this is why AI is so important. We now, for the first time, have the ability to listen at scale to whenever customers come to us. And that when somebody has an interesting insight at the very front lines, it didn't just filter up slowly through the ranks and through the hierarchies. It would be immediately shared to all the most relevant people who needed to hear from that. And that's the difference. And that's why disruption can actually happen now inside of organizations, large or small, is that we can hear the voice of that customer immediately. And every single person can have the charge, the ability, I think they call it the agency, to be able to act as if they are the owner of that voice and be able to amplify that. So there's an organizational issue. And then the AI part, which I'm really excited about, is we can turn all the power of AI and analytics into the organization itself. So, because that's where all the data is, and you already have it inside the company, to know that somebody in department A has something interesting for somebody in department B, and the two of them should meet because there's a lot of overlap in what they're talking about. But in the past, the silos would just be up there and you would never learn about each other's work until it's too late.
Good insights. Makes sense. So roll back the clock to before the time when you were an accomplished author and a big time analyst. What's the advice that you have for kind of a younger version of Charlene, just emerging, let's say, from high school or college?
Yeah, it's the same advice I give to people now. There are two things. One of the best things I learned at Harvard Business School was how to manage my career. So forget all the finance and everything. And I remember my professor saying, the most important asset you will ever manage is your career. So think about it in 18-month increments. As you start a job, think about 18 months from now when you're going to be pretty much mastered everything you could ever do. How are you going to stay motivated? How are you going to position yourself for the next? What's the next thing you want to do? Put in place a process, knowing that you have 18 months before you need to be doing something else. So you may have to start looking for that something else in 12 months. And then the other thing I would say to myself is don't wait to feel that you are 100% qualified to do whatever it is that you want to do next. And this is especially true for the insecure overachiever and especially for women. There's a lot of data that says women will apply for a promotion or leave their job for a new job or start a company when they feel 100% ready to be able to do this. Whereas men will do it when they're 60% ready. And I think this single statistic is responsible for the reason why women aren't advancing in organizations fast enough. We don't get the encouragement from our allies within organizations. We aren't pushed to go out there and start companies and to think about taking on that uncertainty, because we want everything to be right. And we know what the numbers are stacked up against us. Women have a horrible time finding hiring people, being able to get capital. Why would you do this to yourself? And so as an entrepreneur, I waited until I was in my 40s to start a business. And I married an entrepreneur. So he got all the fun starting business after business after business. And at one point he was stable enough that I could go and start a business. And so to wait until I'm 40, I was doing a lot of entrepreneurial things inside of companies. But, I waited until my 40s when there was a lot at risk. I had 2 young kids at home. To start a company at that point was really hard. And so I think I would have said to myself, and I say this to my son who's in college now, go start your business right out of college. So yeah, he's going to come home. He's going to be living at home. But I feel like, take on those risks, take on the promotions, ask for things before you think you're ready. Because the worst thing that could happen is you don't get the job. The second worst thing is that you do get the job and you're not ready. But that's the only way you're going to get there. Get ready to actually do the job.
I have 2 daughters and I want to make sure they listen to the whole podcast, but really to that last answer. And we're almost out of time, but I have to at least get in one last bit of a question. And that's that, let's see, I happen to know that you were at one certain Art Basel exhibit and you just might have seen one certain very famous banana duct taped to a wall. Please share. What was that like?
It was quite the mob scene. You think about, people pushing and everything, but it took me no time to go right up to the front and just get a picture, like a fun little selfie with me and the banana. I should have taken a much better selfie. And then the next day we went back and I was about 2 booths away when the guy went over and ate the banana and went away, came back. Somebody had a banana in their bag and volunteered for that banana to get taped. This is not in the news, but the banana they got for the exhibit to replace the other one came from a bystander. And I happen to have a banana in my bag. Do you want it? So sure, it's taped it up. And so again, I have pictures of banana number 1 and banana 2. So my sense here is that it was awfully fun to see the banana, see people's reactions to the banana. But again, as somebody who does creativity, I also understand why the artist did this. And what are you really buying? What's the value of the things that you buy? So there's tons of commentary about, what's a better way to spend all of that money spent on a banana. But from an artist's perspective, no one else duct taped a banana to a wall before. And that act is doing it. And my lesson is, I hear from people all the time, should I be going out there? Should I be publishing? Should I be posting stuff? I don't have anything new to say. And what I say to them is, yeah, maybe what you're saying is the same as what everyone else is saying, but because you are saying it, it's unique to you. And the context of you saying it to the audience is unique to them. And the relationship that you are doing it and you're having that point right there is absolutely invaluable. So don't judge yourself as not putting value into this just because it has been done before. It hasn't been done before. So banana on the wall and people keep forgetting the tape. It's banana and tape. In that orientation. And the funny thing, the certificate of authenticity comes with installation instructions to take down the food and replace it every 10 to 14 days. So it's an interesting, I think a lot of lessons to be drawn from that. But for me in particular, doing the work that I do, I found in particular, like this sense of expression, and that we always hold ourselves back. And I do it to myself too. Like, do I write about that? Would people be interested in that? I wrote a post yesterday about lessons learned from self-publishing a book and going to Burning Man. And I was like, is this too weird? I had a couple of people read it and they'll go, it's great, just post it. I'm like, okay, fine. I closed my eye, pushed the button and like posted it. I don't know what people are going to think, but it is me saying my thing at that particular point. And I'm just going to leave it up there. So, the banana was fun. Just happened to be there.
You did the impossible. You managed to tape together, pun intended, all of the things we've been talking about in one answer. But now, Charlene, before I can let you go, I'd like to make sure that our listeners know where they can hear more from you, where they can read more about your ideas. How can our listeners continue this conversation with you?
Sure. You can follow me on any of the social media platforms. Charlene Li is usually where you can find me. On Facebook, I'm Charlene Li Author. And I'm also starting a new community called Quantum Networks. You can find more about it at quantum-networks.com. And it's a place for disruptors to gather. Because what I found in my research and talking to disruptors is that it's oftentimes a very lonely, hard road that you are creating. And especially if you're starting a new business, like, where do you connect? How do you find other people who are like-minded, who are trying to create exponential growth, not only in their organizations, but also in their communities and in society? And I created Quantum Networks because I felt that we need more disruptive leaders. So the idea here is to help us become better disruptive leaders and to support each other in our quest to create that exponential growth. Because we have a lot of problems in this world. There's a lot of change that needs to happen. So I want to make sure that we have the best leaders and the most prepared leaders possible to make that change and to lead that change.
Excellent. I'd also encourage all of our listeners to go and read The Disruption Mindset, as well as Charlene's earlier books. And Charlene, hopefully we can have you back another time. Maybe we'll be talking about quantum networks or maybe even your next book.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
Charlene, this has been such a pleasure. Couldn't be more excited about continuing to follow your work, and glad we had this opportunity together. Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for listening to today's episode.
To download Astound's ebook on how to select the right virtual agent for your employees, visit www.astound.ai for more information.